So the future in terms of value creation and capture is really horizontal in nature. No regard for industries or their boundaries. It's really all about bringing value together in ways that solve some of our grandest challenges. So it's really a structural change that the world will go through from industry to more of these horizontal ecosystems.
To start the session with just a short narrative around the topic, and I'll do that, as I said, in a storytelling manner. And so hopefully these stories are insightful. And I'm doing it because the why and the why now about ecosystems is important. And it's history that gives us some insight. So I'll start with a story about the scientific revolution of the 16th and 17th century. It was mainly an intellectual period that did very little for human development. It wasn't until the 1870s or the start of the Second Industrial Revolution that science converged with technologies in ways that accelerated the path of those technologies, and in turn, advanced our human development, to this day known as the most transformative period that advanced human development. So history tells us that it was the greatest period, and it was science and technology and that convergence that drove the period. And I'm a big believer that history is very instructive. And so looking at history, the question is it repeating itself? And if you fast forward 150 years from that period, I do believe we're seeing some element of repeating. So for example, the sciences are converging on one another, which is really the first time that's happened. They're converging yet again more aggressively with technology. And as that happens, we're starting to see massive impact. So for example, DeepMind is now able to predict the structures of most proteins known to science. We see constant news clips about curing cancer and the progress we're making with that. We're seeing CRISPR being used to cure high cholesterol. And importantly, we're seeing signs that advancing Alzheimer's research, understanding the early warning signs, is starting to happen as well. And if you think about human longevity and the projections that we're all going to live longer lives, Alzheimer's and dementia is going to be a critical societal challenge. So a really good example of the building on belief conversation that's permeated this session and how we really do have the means to transform the world and solve these grand challenges. So with that, though, if that old story of 1870 was an industry story, this emerging story is an ecosystem. So I think when the book is written on this period, it's going to be mostly about how we solve these problems and how ecosystems was the manifestation of all of this in solving those problems. And it's very different. Industry was vertically oriented. Ecosystems are horizontally oriented. I love some of the discussion that's already happened about even our organizations being somewhat vertical and hierarchical, yet the world is moving to a structure that's much more horizontal. And what does that mean to how we organize ourselves? And the intersection of all of these things, I can't help it as a futurist to connect some dots, but science and technology is driving our capacity to solve some of these problems. Our collective knowledge is going to feed into that ability to solve these problems. And in the past, the printing press enabled knowledge. I think we're going to experience another printing press moment where artificial intelligence expands our knowledge base in a way that makes everything possible. So with that as a backdrop, this world of ecosystems requires new forms of excellence. What you see behind me is the 5 key areas that we've seen that represent those areas of excellence. So first, we've already talked about purpose-driven. If the means are there to solve these problems, we should leverage those means. Second is foresight. We've also heard a lot about the uncertainty of our world and where things may be going. I'm a big believer that prediction is impossible, but rehearsing the future is critically important. And how do we as leaders consistently and continually rehearse this future that's emerging? New forms of value, we've talked about it at some level, but clearly the opportunity space, thinking differently about value and how we deliver that value, we have to be open to these new ways of thinking. And then lastly, collaboration and platforms. Collaboration, because this ecosystem world is all about relationships. Silos don't work in this world. And collaboration is an easy word to say, but sometimes a difficult word to actually make real. So collaboration, critically important. And then lastly, platforms. Platforms are the engine for these ecosystems. And so science and technology obviously play a major role.